Hello and welcome to another Pilates Hour, and it's a pleasure to be with you again. We've had some real consistent and exciting times, lots of things happening in the virtual world. We're excited that we had a really successful Pilates day all around. I know not just Polestar, but I saw it happening all over the internet of people broadcasting successful classes. I know Lolita is with us today. She's my special guest and dear friend. I know she had some events that were going on. We had some kind of crazy number. I know we started out thinking like, man, if we get 100 people on Pilates Day, it'd be great. And by the end of the day, we had, I think it's 1,140 people just on the Polestar Pilates Day. So I just want to send out a shout out to everybody in the Polestar family and everybody in the Pilates family that was able to celebrate us remembering and reflecting on where our roots come from Joseph and Claire Pilates. And that being said, I thought, wouldn't it be great to have Lolita on the program right after we had our Pilates Day? So Lolita has been a big leader in the Mönchengladbach project with getting the bust of Joseph Pilates over there, and she's, our elder that is still representing the beautiful work of Joe and Claire Pilates. So Lolita, welcome to
Thank
the
you, Brent. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with you, my dear friend.
Thanks for joining me.
I always enjoy it.
So I'm gonna, I was looking for some video footage and I just didn't have access to be able to convert the VHS tapes that you and I did together 20 years ago. When PMA was just starting, but I'm gonna find somebody who can transfer them. And
I believe I have it in VHS.
Yeah, I have it in VHS too. It's just nobody uses VHS anymore. So I'm going to convert it, and I'm going to give you a digital copy, and I'm going to put a digital copy up as well.
I think I do have it in converted, but I will let you know because I think we did it. I'll let you know.
I know it exists. I know it exists.
2001.
It was 2001. It's almost 20 years ago, Lolita. We met.
We had a lot of hair then.
Yes, for so long. So Lolita, I wanted to have Lolita on today because I wanted to talk about three things in particular. I wanted to talk about, basically our celebration of Joe and Claire Pilates, and Lolita, knew Joe and knew Claire Pilates and knew and learned from many of our sort of great leaders in the Pilates industry and is a great leader in the Pilates industry. So I want to talk a little bit about just memories and some cool things and et cetera. And then I want to shift gears and go to, what do you think Joe would think of us today? And I'm thinking of pre-COVID. And then I want to shift and talk more about Lolita and what you're seeing, because you're very avant-garde. You are, the way we met is you sort of came back into the Pilates world when the PMA organized, and you're like, I want to know who's doing what and who's doing what, and I want to study with them. And you've always sort of pushed that envelope, and including, opening up your own school and working, with disciples of Lolita, and you've always been there. So I want to go from there into sort of where we're going in the future, and also how you've had to modify the way you teach, being able to do classes at, what are you, 65 years old now?
I'm 85.
I was just being safe. I know how old you are, how young you are, but at 85, when somebody says, hey, I can't do a virtual class, I can't do this, you know what? Lolita's teaching virtual classes every week, and she's doing virtual chat sessions with her disciples on Zoom, and she's got a great support system, Danielle and Lily and others who are helping her. And, again, it's just looking at that forward way of thinking that, before COVID, you were already doing some of those things.
Yeah.
Right? You were already having some meetings, virtual meetings with some of your leaders around the world. And so, it wasn't that big of a jump to think of how we do that, but we'll talk more about it. So let's start off talking about Joe and Claire, and maybe just share, some of the things. I think it's a time where, we need some humor. as well. And I know you got some funny stories as well, sort of about the Pilates and, maybe your own stories about it. I know that you started off with Corolla and Corolla Trier, and you didn't even know that Joseph Pilates was alive, which I think is hilarious, until Kathy Grant, said, well, he's just down the street kind of thing. But tell us a little bit in your own words, your story of, sort of how you came to meet Joe and Claire.
Okay. Well, I started to dance, first of all, when I was 7 years old. I was born in New York City, and my parents were born in Puerto Rico. And we went to live in Puerto Rico. I started to dance in Puerto Rico, and I loved it, and I knew dancing was for me. And came back to New York, and my family decided to stay in New York. And I went to the School of American Ballet, and I went to Performing Arts High School, and I knew that dancing was for me. I graduated in 1952.
You were a teenager. You were a teenager when you moved back to New York, or you were even younger than that?
I was 11.
Wow, okay.
I was in Puerto Rico from age 3 to age 11. When we returned, my father died of a heart attack, and my mother decided to stay in New York. And that's when I went to the School of American Ballet, and then later to Performing Arts High School. And I was very well trained. My mother was concerned that if I was going to choose such a difficult career as dance, that I'd be very well trained. And I'm very thankful for that, because I've never ever been unemployed. I've just always had work.
Isn't that, I was going to interrupt there for a second, Lolita. It's interesting because how often do we hear parents discouraging their kids from taking a career in dance or a pathway in dance because it is so hard? So especially back in that time, as a single mother, Puerto Rican in New York, that she felt inspired to let you pursue your dream. But not only that, but she supported your dream.
Yes.
And she made sure that you had the best training possible, which is pretty impressive. That your training is impeccable. Where you went to school and who you trained with.
Yes, and I was very lucky to be able to have jazz classes with Luigi and Peter Gennaro and Matt Maddox and Martha Graham and Modern, and just the best of those years. And my second choice when I was going to Performing Arts High School, I had to make a big choice between going to college and going into the dance field. My academic teachers said, you must go to college. I mean, you have an exceptional brain. And my dance teacher said, you have an exceptional talent. I asked my mother, and I said, I don't know which to choose. What do you say? I mean, she was always very willing to give me advice. But this time she said, Brent, it is your life. You are very aware, because you by now are dancing professionally. You know the dance world very well. And I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. And she says that otherwise you continue your education and go to college. So I obviously chose dance. But she said, it is your choice. I will not interfere. It is your life.
No.
Well,
Lolita,
yeah.
what was the idea of what year that was? What year were you making that decision?
That was exactly 1952 that I was making the decision whether to continue in dance or to go to college. And back then, if you were going to be a professional ballet dancer, you could not do both. You could not go to college. I mean, you really had to get into the business.
It's still hard. I think it's still hard. Yeah.
Yes, it is. So I was very lucky that even before I graduated, I had a contract with Slavenska Franklin Ballet, and I traveled for 48 states during 2 years. And I did a season of summer stock. And I've heard that the Metropolitan Opera Ballet was auditioning for dancers, and which was very unusual because It was the best job in New York. It stayed on New York. It was beautiful work circumstances, and it had a very short tour because Sylvester Franklin, we toured 48 weeks, so it was always living out of a suitcase. So I was fortunate to pass the audition. There were like 400 dancers at this audition. And after a couple of days, I was chosen amongst the 14, 9 ladies and 5 gentlemen that were chosen, because we had a new artistic director at the Met who wanted some of his own people around. And in 1958, I was a soloist and at the Met, and I went to take a class with a very well-known ballet teacher, Edward Caton, and accidentally the young man next to me thrust his leg and caught my left leg behind the knee, and I crumpled down. I was taken to Dr. Henry Jordan, a very well-known name. He was a surgeon at Lenox Hill Hospital, and he mostly worked on athletes and dancers. He loved the dancers. So he told me I did not need surgery, but I should keep my quadriceps very strong after the trauma I had suffered in order to prolong my career, and sent me to Corolla Trier to do these exercises. Well, I never heard of contrology. I never heard of these exercises. I asked amongst my colleagues, and nobody really knew them. I walked into Corolla's. It was 200 West 58th Street in New York City. And it was her living room that she had turned into a studio. And she was a very striking looking woman. She was a German, tiny, small, and very strong-willed. I immediately fell in love with the whole thing, the apparatuses. The movements were certainly nothing different from what I had been trained, but they were different, a little different. And the apparatus, and a month later, I was back at work, which was amazing. So, but I was in love with Pilates. Yeah.
So I have a question for you. When the doctor referred you to Corolla, did he say, go to Corolla or go do contrology? Did he even mention the word Pilates at that time, or was it?
No, he said, go do these exercises. They'll be very good for you. And they'll say they'll keep your quadriceps and your body very strong. He didn't really emphasize. He did say it's this woman and 200 at the address, and that was it. But when
Isn't that interesting?
I find that
very interesting, because the doctor, he knew to refer to Corolla for rehabilitation of athletes and dancers in particular. Like, he knew already in the 50s, it's like, this is where you need to go. And I'm always curious, is where did Pilates or contrology fall out of grace from the medical community, that they sort of quit that communication? Because that's what I hear with Eve Gentry, I hear it with Corolla, I hear it with you, I heard it with Romana.
I think it was truly one doctor, really. It was Dr. Henry Jordan, because he was the one, even that when Tanneke Leclerc got polio, he was the one who treated her. He treated dancers. He loved the dancers. He used to go to the dance, the ballet and whatnot. And he had known about Joe, but Corolla had a different way of dealing with him. Corolla would call him up and say, Lolita's making good progress. Her leg is much stronger. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. What do you suggest? So that was always very nice. So he was more inclined to send people to Corolla than to actually send them to Joe. But
so I want to stop you right there. I want to start there, because I think this is a big take-home message that you're sharing, Lolita. It's like, so often the Pilates teacher feels intimidated to be able to communicate with the doctor or the therapist or the chiropractor. And the reality is we as doctors and therapists, we like when the Pilates teacher communicates with us. We like to know how our clients are doing. And the more, even, we don't want to have long conversations, but little conversations of like, hey, they're making good progress, they're getting stronger, quality, but anything else you want us to do? And Corolla was a good example of that. So the fact that she had this rapport with the doctor and was able to communicate on your behalf is essential. I think that's something we should take to heart now and not be afraid to communicate with the physicians and the practitioners that are in our community. So go ahead. I just thought that was
absolutely,
a really good point.
you are so right, because you see, Joe's ego and his age also, because Joe was 1958, well, he was in his 80s at the time, and or not quite, in his 70s.
Late 70s.
Yeah. And his ego wouldn't allow him to do that with a doctor, really. He felt he knew it all.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about Joe. Let's talk about some of the we all know, like I imagine when I die, there's going to be some stories of the good, the bad, and the ugly of Brent Anderson.
Right.
And I hope people get a good laugh out of it, and definitely don't ever feel like I would be offended if you're telling stories of things that I did bad or wrong, or mistakes that I made, or stupid things that I said. But tell us a little bit about Joe, the good, the bad, the ugly sort of kind of thing. By that time, you were already in your 20s.
I was 24 when I went to Corolla.
So you were quite young coming in. Joe was quite old when you first got to meet him. What was that like?
But I went after I was well and was working. I kept going to Corolla for 7 years.
Okay.
And Anna Krisanovska was one of her assistants, as well as Kathleen Stanford Grant. Because I went in the afternoon, I had a closer rapport with Kathy Grant, and we became good friends. And one day, after 7 years, Corolla said to me, I hear you're thinking of stopping dance and starting to teach, and why don't you consider teaching this method? You love it. And I said, well, I guess, yes, that would be wonderful. And I felt that it was essential for the dancers. So she told me about this program that would pay for my training from the New York University State Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So I took her training, which was 520 hours, 6 to 8. We always stretched it a year with the holidays and the summer and whatnot. And during that time, I realized that I was not interested in working with Corolla. She was a very, very fine teacher, very meticulous. Her place was impeccable, but I really didn't care for her mood swings. So I was talking to Kathy Grant, and
I actually saw. I want to let you know that I saw those one time. I was down in Los Angeles with Elizabeth Larkham and Jillian Hessel and a couple others, and Jillian was working with her and demonstrating something, and I watched her pull a stick out and whack Jillian in the class, in the demonstration with people she didn't know, and I saw her in one of those mood swings, and I was like, wow.
And smile immediately after. Right. And immediately after that,
Jillian, if you're listening, I know you remember that.
Well, so I was talking to Cassie, and I said, well, this course that I have taken, I love it, and I'll just integrate it into my ballet teaching. And she said, well, Lolita, why don't you go to Joe's? I said, Joe who? And that's a famous story. She said, Joe Pilates. I said, Joe Pilates? Joe Pilates, I thought was dead. I mean, Corolla spoke of Mr. Pilates, always with great reverence. And she always talked about the Isle of Man and the springs and the injured soldiers and whatnot. So I thought the man is German. He probably died soon after. And Well, she said, no, he's 3 blocks away. And I said, oh my God. So after I recovered, she said, let's, you and I go there now. So we walked our 3 blocks.
This is you and Kathy Grant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We walked our 3 blocks to 56th Street. We were on 58th Street. He was between 8th Avenue, between 55th and 56th. Went up the rickety stairs of that building, and the studio faced the street. And there were 2 doors, and Kathy opened the door to this room, which was filled with clothing and beds that went like this, and cooking utensils and personal effects. And Clara was standing in the middle of the room with her white uniform and her white little shoes and her sweet face. And Kathy introduced me. And Kathy had already studied with Joe when she had had very bad knee injury. And she said, we're here because we wish to be certified by Mr. Pilates. And with that, the tsunami walked in, and he was wearing his little black shorts and his white turtleneck and his espadrilles. They looked like espadrille, like a canvas shoe that I think he made, because they were similar to a shoe that was weighted that we worked with. And Kathy said, we're here because we want to be certified by you. And he said, certified? What does that mean? So Kathy turned to me and she said, Lolita was just certified by Carola Trier. Well, with that, there was this axial elongation, and he lifted up 2 inches. He turned his head and walked away. So I thought, well, that was the end of that. And then he said, well, what does it mean? So we explained to him that this was in 1965, and that about this program that would pay him to train both of us, because both of us had been dancers and changing professions. So he said, well, I go get the papers. And we did, and then we spent a year with him. And this was the year 1966. He was in poor shape, in the sense that Joe smoked 17 cigars a day plus cigarettes. He drank at least about a quart a day. He was not in good condition. He was in excellent physical condition, except when he coughed, it was like incredible sound that came out of his lungs. He died of emphysema, but
He died, if I'm right, 67 or 68? What
he
year
was
did
he was it was in 1967 that he died, October 9th, the same as my birthday, 1967. And so
I remember that, but I was only 4 years old.
oh, you poor baby.
Imagine, I was already doing Pilates, though, I'm sure. I look at pictures and I was already planking and rolling up and all kinds of things. So it was in my blood.
It was in your blood too.
So you had the training. I didn't realize your training was that close to Joe's passing away. So it was within.
It was his last year.
Last couple of years of his life.
And he was very thankful that we were there, because he truly needed us. In the midst of this, Bob's seat had left him. And he was crushed by that, because he thought Bob would be taking over the studio. He certainly didn't expect all these little ballerinas were going to take over the method. So he expected a great big man like you to take over his method. See, so you were not in the right place at the right time.
I would have loved to.
Yeah. And so he was happy to have us. And then I had to go back with the Met on tour. And while I was away with the Met in 1967, to my surprise, because when I left him in April before the tour, he wasn't well, but he wasn't that bad. Mostly he was going deep depression. And the thing that was impressed me a lot was that when he was having these, we called them a bad day. Kathy and I would say, Joe had a bad day today. And he would come into the studio and he would sit, but he wouldn't correct. He wouldn't say anything. He just would stare at the floor. And if a client said, Mr. Pilates, what's wrong? What's the matter, Joe? You're not very cheerful today. And he would say, I have not accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with the method. He said, I thought I would change the world, and I tried. And he did try. He would sell at Macy's. He would go right to President Kennedy. He would do everything to promote the idea of his method. And he really thought of himself as, I say, a universal reformer. He expected to change the world through his method. And he says, and I have not accomplished it. And then Clara would come and put her arms around him, and she was always sweet and she was always tender. And she'd say, oh, come on, Papa, snap out of it. Look at all the people we've helped. Look at all the people who love us. And if anybody could snap him out, it was her. But he was very depressed during that period, and he was depressed with not having accomplished what he dreamt of doing. And so to jump, I then went to live in Puerto Rico. I started a ballet company, as you will know. We had a trial which declared the method generic. And I had you come down, and we hosted you, and you gave us, we trained in the, my teachers and we did your training, a full training, and we were certified. And then I was there as artistic director for 26 years, founder, artistic director, chief dish, bottle washer, and the whole bit, in a poor island, which is never an easy job. But we really managed to do some very good work and travel internationally and so on. And then at 70, I came to live in the States. Iram, my husband, wanted a change. And that's when I started to work more with Pilates. And that's when I started the Pilates Master Mentor Program, which is for a mentor program for certified teachers and who have 3 years experience. And then they requested a teacher training program. So that started Lolita's Legacy. And that is now doing very well internationally. And now I'm in the world of Zoom. Who would have ever thought
it? So, this is, I know a lot of the story, but I got a lot of new things out of it today. So I hope the listeners did as well. I want to go back to the concept or the comment about Joe being depressed because he didn't feel like his method had achieved what he had envisioned. And I want to create an environment here. And to me, it was a little emotional as you were saying that, because I was thinking, you know, other great mentors of mine have also said the same thing. So,
yes.
You know, I think of somebody like Jesus Christ, or I think of somebody who, you know, was not accepted during their time, but then millions are following them years later, decades later, 100 years later, 1,000 years later. And so Joseph sort of falls into that category that, you know,
Absolutely.
even though he was depressed,
yes.
You know, we think of what the expansiveness is of it now. And I think we were doing some calculations, and the PMA certainly has done some of them. And I want to say, last report I had seen, this was from the, I forget what it is, International Hospitality and Racket Club kind of thing, whatever, like the big organization for health clubs and those kind of things. And they had done research. This was probably back in, I want to say 2012, 2013. And they were already saying that there were over 130,000 people who said they taught Pilates and approximately 12 million people who said that they participate in some form of Pilates. Now, one of the people that probably did the most advertising for Pilates ever was Mari Windsor.
Yes.
And Mari Windsor just passed away. You were able to attend some of her memorial service as a friend of hers. I remember when Mari first started doing the infomercials and the videos, and everybody thought this is a horrible thing, this is a disgrace. I heard people say, and then it was like,
Really?
are you kidding me? Do you know how many people Mari Windsor touched?
Absolutely.
How many people around the world became aware of Pilates just because of Mari Windsor's influence? So tell me a little bit about maybe your,
I would like to
working
tell you,
or getting to know Mari.
well, I would like to tell you that I was then living in Puerto Rico, but I always maintained my relationship with Kathy Grant. Kathy used to come see Ballet Concierto de Puerto Rico, my company, whenever we performed anywhere near New York. She would always be there. And we always would speak to each other and sadly and say, the method is dying. We knew that so many studios were being closed of our people we knew, and the method was just disappearing. And this was really sad for us because I was really more involved with ballet than Pilates, and she was teaching at Tisch. So it was a very small group that the two of us were working with. And then Mari came on the scene, and we were so happy because we said, thank God it's not going to die. We were sure the method was going to just fizzle out.
Let's talk some numbers. So in 1991, 1992, I think there were 500 people who claimed to be teaching Pilates. And by 2012, there's 135,000. They claim to teach Pilates, right? I mean, I don't know how good anybody's teaching is or training, but that's a crazy exponential growth over 20 years.
And
to go from 500
the day I met her at the PMA, she was so excited to meet me, and I was so excited to meet her. It was like a rock star. And we bonded beautifully. And I just held a memorial service in her honor, and bless her.
Yeah, bless Mari Windsor.
But I'd like to tell you
on Saturday for her, and I know that she chose the way she wanted to pass, and she was able to say her goodbyes and to hear everybody say beautiful things about her and how much she contributed to our profession as a whole. And I think this is true with a lot of times the innovators of our profession. So we're going to go here next. And by the way, audience, if you're out there, I see a couple questions starting to come in or comments coming in. So I'll start addressing those as they come in for either Lolita or for myself. But I think that it's, Joseph Pilates was an innovator, right? And so, when some of us that are innovators as well, and we come in and we introduce, new ways of doing things. Like I remember when Ken Edelman, built the Allegro Reformer. And I remember people thinking like, you can't teach a group reformer class with more than 4 reformers. And it's like, you teach a mat class with more than 4 people, and I remember just thinking, and then how successful reformer classes became. And then thinking, you can't teach Pilates on video, and Mari Windsor taught it on video. And then it was like, you can't do virtual streaming on Pilates, and Pilates Anytime has saved our lives as Pilates teachers by having our work recorded and available to millions of people that want it and to have those archives. So, it's like this idea of continuing to be innovators, even in the name of Joseph and Clara Pilates, to be able to say that, they were so influential. And, what are your thoughts? Because I know that Joseph, like you said, he had this ego, and he probably wouldn't like people changing his work, what he does. But in the big picture, if you were to think of, Joseph's heart right now, what do you think he's feeling right now? If he, you and I both believe in life after death and continuance and, the universal energy. And, we've had many very deep spiritual conversations between us, you with a beer in your hand and me with a Dr. Pepper. But,
Only a beer.
just a beer, it's fine. No judgment. Don't judge me for Dr. Pepper. I won't judge you for a Corona. But like, what do you think, what do you think Joe and Clara are feeling right now to look, if they were with us and they could see this, and I think they are, but, what do you think they're feeling? Like, what is?
Well, Brent, we both know that we have been teachers and we know the satisfaction that there is in teaching. So how can Joe look down on us and see our love for his method, our enthusiasm, how we help people and not be happy and not be pleased with his accomplishments? I have to tell you a quick story. When I started the Pilates Master Method uh, program, a lady called me from Germany and she said, I'm a single mother, I cannot go to Florida. And she said, won't you consider coming to Germany? And I said, well, where do you live? And she said, Dusseldorf. I said, Dusseldorf? How far are you from Mönchengladbach? She said, 20 minutes by car. And she called, she said, I said, I'll go. So I went. When I got there, I held a class on Pilates Day, free at a theater where Joe had boxed. 100 people were there. Brent, I had them come over and speak to me, and nobody in Mönchengladbach knew Joseph Pilates. I was so crushed. All I could remember was the old man in his sad days, in his bad days, as we used to say. And I made it my business to do something about it. And I gathered all my forces. And in 2011, we placed a plaque right where next to the place where he was born, beautiful linden tree. And we had all these conferences, and we still are having the Heritage Conference in Mönchengladbach every other year. And it's such a source of pride to me. One day I get into a taxi, and the taxi driver says to me, what are you here for? And I said, oh, there's a conference on Pilates, a Pilates conference. He said, oh, he was born here. I said, he said, did you know that? I said, yes, I do. And I was so proud that even the taxi drivers know now who Joseph Pilates was. And we also know where his ashes are. And his ashes are in Ferncliff Cemetery in New York City. And we hold a conference 1 year Mönchengladbach and 1 year we do Ferncliff in New York.
You gave me the great honor that first year to be able to sort of moderate that memorial service. That was so
yes, you did.
touching.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I really appreciate that.
We had a lovely little chapel, and Brent moderated the event.
It was good. It was great. Hey, Lolita, I got a bunch of comments coming in, and some of them are questions to you. Some of them are just expressions of love and gratitude. And a comment from Tracy said that she found Pilates the same way through her orthopedist. She was a dancer, hurt her knee, was sent to Pilates to do Pilates, and that's how she became a Pilates teacher. And she said she retired from dentistry to teach Pilates.
Oh, really?
So thank you, Tracy. Marcial said, this is wonderful, what a pleasure. Sarah says, Lolita is amazing and so inspiring. And then I have some long comments from Sylvia from Brazil. She says, Lolita's mother was fundamentally not only in her daughter's life, but in the lives of countless people in the world because Lolita made choices that influenced our life. Thank you.
Oh,
So
how
that
nice.
was a nice comment.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yes.
And then Murat from Turkey said, I would like to thank you both to make possible this once in a lifetime Polestar experience. And Murat is the sweetest, greatest teacher, and he trained with us in Germany like 15, 20 years ago. Beautiful dancer, and returned to his home country of Turkey, and is a major leader in teaching Pilates and has just such a great spirit about him. So thank you, Murat. Question from Sylvia says, Lolita lived the beginning of Pilates. Many things have changed as Pilates is being trained in the world from the beginning to the present day. What would she want for this incredible technique for the next years and years to come? Great question, Sylvia.
Yes. Well, my motto is preserve and evolve. There is no doubt about it. We have received such a beautiful legacy from not only Joe, but and all the other wonderful teachers that we have had. And I believe you do not stop Pilates in the year 1967. I believe you have to continue developing Pilates because we have learned so much. Science has made such impossible, incredible, progress. Look at us right here talking to each other through this little square thing. It's amazing. So how can we say, it stopped in 1967? No. And that was one of the reasons that I said, Brent, I would like you to come to Puerto Rico, and I want to know what is and the cutting edge, what is for rehabilitation, because with all the training I had never heard of osteoporosis. No one ever spoke of that. And spondylolisthesis, stenosis, all of these things, vertigo. We treated everybody the same. You came in, it was 100, the roll up, the roll over. Hello, there is no way I can do that. I mean, there's no way. I have to teach the body in front of me, get acquainted with that person, because first of all, I'm a dancer, and I was not trained to do entre-chassis and double tour when I entered a room, right? Or when I was little. So you have to evolve. And
so I got a couple of really good questions, and I think I love the idea of preserve and evolve, because Joseph, from everything I've studied, everything I've read, he never was static.
Never.
It was always evolving, and he's always trying to be creative with equipment and with materials and the method, and just expanding. There's a comment from Mary, and she says, has Lolita ever tried the oeuvre? And if so, what do you think about the oeuvre from Australia with Daniel? I know you have, so tell us a little bit about your experience with the oeuvre.
Well, it was Brent Anderson that convinced me to get in this oeuvre. And it was it was strange feeling, and it was interesting, but it didn't tempt me enough to get one and put it in my home. So I have to be truthful. It's interesting, but I have to also admit I didn't give it a chance, because my only experience with it was Brent at that time said, you have to try this, and I did.
Well, and just so everybody knows, we're going to have a webinar with Daniel Vadetta, and also with my dear brother Victor with the connector from California. And we're going to have a little discussion about proprioception and the science of using the connector and using the oeuvre. So that's coming up in a couple weeks, I think. We'll share with you. So thank you, Mary. Tracy made a comment, and she said, Joe and Clara lived through you, talking about you, Lolita. So that's awesome.
Oh, how wonderful. That is beautiful, because that's one of the things that I want to be able to impart is I'm shocked when I know of schools that don't even mention Joe Pilates. They don't mention the history. I mean, it's so much richer when you know where you come from. It's like knowing your parents. And these were our professional parents. And
Yeah.
the
And
essence of
that
them,
leads
and
to
they
the
were
next
so
question.
humble. They were so humble. They were so poor. Their whole life was dedicated to this method. And
We have a question. I was gonna say we have a question from Giorgio along that same line. I believe it's our good educator Giorgio in Italy, in Rome. And glad you're doing well, Giorgio, if it's the right Giorgio. But he says, hello and thank you for what you are doing. He says, I'd like to know more about Clara in the studio in New York. Was she an active creator of the method? So just a question about Clara's role in the contrology method there.
well, one thing was, Joe, like you said before, tweaked everything. Every time he made a new reformer, and he was always making reformers, he tweaked it differently. Either a little longer because somebody was taller or wider, or, well, it was the same thing with Clara. But Clara had a natural talent for his work. And the beauty of Clara, and I don't want to offend anybody, but it's pretty unanimous amongst all of us, was that she was a better teacher than Joe. She was a better teacher than Joe because Clara had patience. Joe, towards the end of his life, and I don't think even when he was younger, was a patient man. No, he was always.
I heard that from everybody. Ron Fletcher said that. I know that many of the elders said that Clara was a much better teacher and more compassionate and kind, and yeah.
And it was wonderful because when I worked with Joe, he was mostly interested in challenging me because I was healthy and I was very, very fit, and he wanted to see what I could not do, or invent something new. When I worked with Clara, it was quite different because she wanted to make me feel, and her touch was so wonderful, and her way of molding you was so wonderful, and very little talk. Both of them were adults when they came to the US, so English was not their native language, but certainly Joe spoke better English than Clara. But Clara's touch, as well as his in a different way, was unforgettable.
Thank you for that. I think that would definitely answer Giorgio's question. I got a number more coming up. They're coming up quick now, so we're going to speed up a little bit. We have about 10 more minutes, so I'm going to try to get through some of these with you, Lolita. And we'll just see what we can get through, and that'll be the best we can do. And we're going to finish with one that I have that I've seen come up multiple times, so I know it'll be a good one. Judith asked, so how do you feel about the authentic versus contemporary Pilates? And I'm going to combine that with another one that was asking, Tiziana said, no, not Tiziana, it was Vladimir from Brazil, was talking about the idea of how do we manage to preserve Pilates legacy against many techniques that are now calling themselves Pilates. So I felt like those two questions sort of tied in together of, the authentic, contemporary, and then some of the stuff that's out there that uses the word Pilates, but we sort of feel is really far out there from Pilates. So any thoughts that you want to share on maybe that spectrum from, authentic being what Romana taught, and,
Yeah, that's what I tell them. I ask them, what do you mean by classical? Because I know what classical ballet is. Joe died in 1967. So, I mean, classical Pilates, if you would have said to Joe, he taught classical Pilates, he would have said to you, what's that? The fact is that he didn't think of it as classical Pilates. He taught Pilates. And therefore, we have, if you want to stay with what he taught, bravo for you. I don't. I want to evolve. I know that there were certain things that I did not understand because, like a dancer, I had an almost flat back, which I'm not saying it's great. I've had some lumbar problems with it. But when I lay down, my back was imprinted. That was no problem. But I remember looking at other people and other ladies and whatnot that had big curves in their spine. And when they lay down, and he kept insisting that they lower the waist and imprint the spine, their pubis would raise up. And I kept thinking, that looks very strange to me. So I and it's not only that, I don't believe in this bouncing anymore. I had it with jazz class. We used to bounce ourselves into oblivion. And I don't think that's the best way to achieve flexibility. So it has nothing to do. I mean, I'm a thinking person too. So are you.
Mm-hmm.
So we've evolved. Back then, science was not what it is today.
So let's go on with a little bit of Vladimir's from Brazil's question, because I think this is sort of the, it's so gray area for somebody to say what determines if the methodology is preserving, even if it is evolving. Because I would consider, Polestar does everything we can to preserve the history of Joseph and Claire Pilates. We invested the money to take the video clips of all of the the elders as much as we could to try to gather information and to hear from everybody and to study with everybody to understand a more integrated look at how different people interpreted Joseph's work differently, because they had different needs. And I always find that very interesting that, when somebody says, oh, I do the classical, or I do the authentic, or I do the original, and it's like, well, what does that even mean? Like when I studied with Eve Gentry, she had her pre-Pilates work that she did because she had worked with so many people in a rehabilitative state. And she really had this sensitivity that, I'm very confident Joe didn't have that sensitivity, but Eve Gentry did. And so, from Michelle Larson and from sort of that evolution, and Ron Fletcher with his, background and what he brought to the Pilates world, and you with yours, and Carola Trier with hers, and Kathy Grant and Mary, and the list goes on of people who have been great contributors that are first generation teachers of Pilates work. And then there's second generations and third and fourth and fifth, and now we're getting to sixth and seventh generations of it. And I think the purpose of the PMA, and if I do a little PMA plug here, is to preserve the integrity of Joseph and Claire's work. At least we set a minimal guideline that came from the elders. Lolita's been very much a part of this, of understanding what it is that we call the Pilates method. And that the areas that we agree on, that these are things that are essential, that need to be in the training that we call Pilates. So I think maybe to answer Vladimir's question, and Lolita, correct me if I'm wrong, but to me it's like, if you're making things that are like, aqua lattes and, donut lattes and those kind of things, whatever people make and crazy things, it's like, it's a fusion. So I have no problem with fusions.
No, I don't
but
either.
I think when you're talking Pilates, that there's a huge spectrum of evolution within the Pilates method that still deeply respects Joseph and Claire Pilates' work and understands where it comes from and understands the apparatus and the mat work and the concepts and the guiding principle of Joe, which really was about whole body health. I mean, if we want to talk about the spiritual side of things, whole body health was achieving a balanced development of body, mind, and spirit. That was, Joseph's #1 guiding principle. And it could be achieved by exercise, good nutrition, sleep habits, hygiene, plenty of fresh air and sunshine, and a balance between work, play, and rest. I mean, that to me would be something that consolidates all of us together as Pilates teachers, which is something we need more now than ever. What I want to do is I have one more question. And Lolita, this is personal to you, and it basically is, your advice to us as Pilates teachers in these generations after you is, what do you feel would help us to be a great Pilates teacher? What would help us to be you know, true to the method, even in a state of preservation and evolution. So maybe your thoughts on that?
Yes, I believe in continued education. You never stop learning. Don't ever block yourself to this is the only way, because there are many ways. So you evolve. That is what evolution is. And, you know, accept what is. You look at it. You don't accept everything. You reject. No, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you in that. But you're entitled to think that. Uh, I I don't agree with a lot of things that I see going around that are called Pilates, because they're not. At the same time, when I teach, I say, this is the way I was taught. In the old days, we did it this way. I am doing it this way now for this reason. And that, I think, gives the person a greater understanding. That is not a capricious thing of, I changed it because I felt like it. No, I changed it because I thought about it. And I could see within the scope of science that this was not right. I could see that maybe the cervicals, for the way a boxer would want to use his neck and strength in the neck was different, maybe from the way a dancer would use her neck, and that there were too many cervical problems, and that you cannot give rolling movements to a person with osteoporosis or inversion to many of these people who are a certain age. And let's not forget, we live much longer than we used to. So we do have a lot of conditions. You have to treat the body in front of you. It's not apply one size fit all. No.
Yeah. Wow. And I mean, I've got a ton and a flood of questions coming in about equipment and original equipment versus new equipment, and novice movers being moved through Pilates, you know, too quickly. You know, these are all questions that, you know, it's like, this is one of the things I would share, and I think Lolita would agree with me, is that, you know, when we are focusing the Pilates method on a client-centric, a client-centered approach, right? This is what she's talking about, is like, look, the rollover and the roll-up are great exercises. However, if you have osteoporosis advanced stage, it's not a great exercise. So we find a modification. Does that stop being Pilates because we find a modification for a pathology? No, it doesn't. We're still, our goal is whole body movement, to integrate movement, but we understand things a little bit differently now because of science. If I remember this debate I had with Romana years ago, and we were in San Francisco and we were talking about equipment, and she was not happy with Ken Endelman making equipment that wasn't to the original specs that she had in her equipment. And the discussion was very simple, and in no disrespect in any direction, but her argument was that the original work has to be done on the original equipment. And I asked her, I said, Romana, a high back arch, right? So that's when your feet are on the bar, your hands are on the shoulder pads, and your body's up in a full arch. Now, Romana was all of 4'10" at that time. I'm 6'2". Her width her shoulder width would come somewhere between my collarbone, right? And I said, Romana, does the high back arch create the same physical load on my body as your body on this small machine? And we argued it all night long. We finally agreed to disagree. But the reality is structurally, there is nothing similar to her being able to do it on that machine and me doing it on that machine. For me to have the same experience, I needed a machine that would take into consideration that I'm 6'2". And so when you think of, you know, in the fact that, you know, if my shoulders were to come in so close, I would be subluxing my shoulders to be able to be in a high back arch on that small reformer.
And
so
Joe
I know
would
some
have
people
understood that. And Joe would have understood that and designed something for you, because it could not be the same as for her.
That's right. He was looking at, and this is why I say client-centric Pilates method rather than exercise-centric or equipment-centric, to me, is going to resonate a lot longer in the future with the evolution of Pilates, staying true to the principles and true to the methodology, but from a client-centric way. Lolita, you have anything else you want to share with the group today? Anything that you're just feeling inspired to share with everybody?
I think we are so fortunate to practice this method. I think there is such great satisfaction, joy in it, and we should enjoy it when we teach. It's fun, and you should keep it fun, and life has changed. We will adjust to whatever you roll with the punches. So that is going into a new phase now. And good luck.
Sure.
Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you to all you mothers. I'm pretty sure that Joseph Pilates would also endorse us getting on Zoom and go to webinar to be able to share his method.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we got some exciting things coming up. Lolita, I cannot thank you enough. You know how much I love you. And
thank you, dear.
We have some great webinars coming up in the near future. So next week, I have invited Ada Wells, Karen Staples, and Lisa Stoltz, all very well-known physical therapists, Pilates teachers, certified Pilates teachers with the PMA, leaders in the PMA, leaders in the Pilates world. And we're going to be talking about Pilates prescriptions. We want to talk a little bit about what I had asked Lolita about the doctor prescribing to Corolla and sending Lolita as a patient there. And also Tracy had mentioned in the conversation that she had been sent. And we want to talk a little bit about like, how do we work with that? So get your questions ready, because I think a lot of it too is just being able to break down that barrier of thinking like, oh, they're at this professional level. No, we're all at that professional level. And I can tell you that, I choose consciously to send my patients to Pilates teachers to re-educate movement, much more than I do to somebody who has medical training who does not understand movement. And so it's very important to me to make sure that the person working with my clients understands movement. That's going to be exciting. So that one's going to be next week on May 14th. On May 21st, we're introducing something really new and exciting. This is from the organization called the Pacific Institute. And we're going to be introducing a new product called Mindsetting for Wellbeing and Performance. And I invited the president and the lead director for this. So Scott and Tracy are going to be with me. And this is going to be dealing with mindset. And I think that it's so important right now with the challenges that we have. And we often have these blocks in front of us. And they block our vision. And they block our vision from seeing the potential of how we have to pivot or change. So the fear that we have of trying to teach a class on, in a virtual class, or the fear of reopening a studio as we have some of these restrictions lifted off. So I thought the timing would be great, that they're going to share something with us and we'll talk to them. And then I mentioned on the 28th that I'm going to have Daniel Vladeta and Victor Ungen with us. And we're going to be talking about some, evolutions that we've talked about a little bit today of the method that have been widely embraced in the Pilates method and also criticized. And we're going to talk to them so you get your questions ready. The one that I am most excited about is on June 4th, Elizabeth Larkham and Ken Endelman have agreed to be my guests. And we're coming up on our 30th anniversary of organizing Polestar. And it was the three of us back in 1992. We were working together since 1988, and just really looking forward to bringing up some good memories and some things that were happening back in that time, and just sort of where we are today and where Ken is and where Elizabeth is, where I am. So that's going to be a really exciting one. So we got a lot of great programming. Make sure you just know that every Thursday at this time, we're going to provide some great programming for you. So Lolita is having a celebration through her legacy program. That's going to be a free Mother's Day sessions. And so we're going to send you the links to that with this program. So make sure that if you're interested in getting some more of Lolita, like I'm sure you are, that you can take a class with her. So that's going to be great. And thank you, Lolita, for offering that to everybody. It's awesome. Well, that concludes our time. I had one thing I was going to share was that, you know, Lolita knows how much I love Puerto Ricans. And that was really one of the claves, we say, between Lolita and myself, is when Lolita realized that I was married to a Puerto Rican, New Yorican, that was sort of like, yeah, I can hang out with this bald gringo. We can do some stuff together. But
I can
you know,
forgive
I
his
just
accent.
what's that?
I can forgive his accent when he speaks Spanish.
I speak Spanish. And we apologize that we had a number of people that came on that wanted us to speak Spanish, but we just wouldn't have had time. So I think we might put together a special webinar that's in Spanish, and maybe I'll invite Lolita back and other Spanish-speaking guests so that we can provide some great, you know, content for people in Spanish. Hey, thank you everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you. Lolita, thank you again. Love
Thank
you.
you.
Love all of you
Love
out
you
there.
too.
Please be safe, be sane. Do not be so anxious that you put yourself in an uncomfortable position. As we talked about last week, take your time, watch what's going on, prepare yourself very well before you open up your studios wherever you are. Follow your heart and your gut. It always is going to know best, and not your head. Your head often will get in the way where you think, I got to open up, I got to make money. Listen to your heart and think of what's the safest thing to do for your clients, and take advantage of pivoting right now, if you can, into some other ways of learning how to teach the Pilates method. And with that, take care, everybody. Thank you, Lolita.
And thank you, dear Brent.
You're very welcome.